Hello, this is Gary Boomer, founder and strategist at BoomerConsulting. And today I'd like to welcome you to the Boomer Briefing, our podcast that can help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm not sure our topic today, which is Beyond Spreadsheets, Unleashing Blockchain's Revolutionary Impact on the Accounting Profession, we can do in 20 minutes, but we can certainly have a good discussion and hopefully provide you some value. Today with me is Amanda Wilkie, a senior consultant at Boomer Consulting and certainly an expert in the blockchain arena. And Amanda, welcome to the podcast.
Happy to be here, Gary. I know you and I can talk long past 20 minutes on blockchain, so I'm excited for this conversation.
Yes, and it's kind of impromptu, even though we kind of have to refrain ourselves a little bit. But would you start by just telling your background and why you gained interest in blockchain?
Yeah, certainly, Gary. So, I am a technologist at heart. So my undergrad degree was computer science, and I ended up working in technology within the accounting profession. And that's been for about the last almost 20 years. I think I just hit my 18th tax season. Well, about 10 years ago, 2013 feels like a lot longer. This new thing called Bitcoin had just been out for a couple of years, and people started asking me, they said, well, you're in the accounting profession and you're in technology. What do you think about this Bitcoin fad? And that was the first time I actually really started looking into Bitcoin. And of course, that led me to blockchain. And from a technology standpoint, from my view, I was like, Bitcoin, what? Cryptocurrencies, what? Blockchain is actually the thing that's going to change the profession and change the world. That's a revolutionary technology. And so that's really where I got started. So for the last 10 years, Gary, I've been writing and speaking on blockchain and cryptocurrencies or digital assets in the accounting profession.
Well, that's great. I know the passion. I can just tell from your voice about this and having known you for several years. And we feel so fortunate to have that expertise within Boomer Consulting. And I know my experience in this area has come very similarly from investing in crypto, which taught us about the blockchain. And then now with our intellectual capital and intellectual property, the blockchain is going to help us protect that, also create it and promote it. So why don't you tell us how the blockchain technology has really revolutionized the accounting profession and what specific changes you've seen in the profession to date?
Yeah. Well, Gary, this is one of those areas where I'm not afraid to admit that I was wrong. Again, 10 years ago, I was like, let's not even think about or worry about cryptocurrencies. Those are definitely a fad. Our banking system isn't going to transform fast enough. Our regulatory landscape isn't going to transform fast enough. And I see, blockchain is really what's going to impact us first and impact us the most. And there is a lot of opportunity for things like automation and, smart contracts. I think of smart contracts, which are, kind of self-executing applications or code, if you will, that will execute a contract. There's a lot of opportunity for accounting firms there, especially around auditing those things and making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. But again, I really feel like I was wrong on this one because digital assets has been one of the biggest impacts on public accounting. We have cryptocurrencies, you have NFTs, you have all these different asset classes out there now that we've had to find ways, the profession has had to find ways to account for. So I think that's one of the big impacts that blockchain and cryptocurrencies have had on the accounting profession, the last 10 years or so.
Well, that just leads right into more and more questions about the impact here. And I know we're members of the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance, and you're certainly an active member, and have helped with some white papers and other publications there. You might talk about the impact on tax, and we'll get into auditing in just a little bit, but also the economic impact here from a cross-border payment standpoint and how that all works and why the blockchain is so important there.
Yeah, Gary, and that was one of the first kind of early on use cases where things like cross-border payments, remittance, being able to send a currency, we'll just call it a currency or any type of asset, quickly and cheaply, but also being able to track it. That was one of the things early on that everyone said about cryptocurrency was that, well, it's, there's an anonymity to it, and then therefore, there's challenges. You can't track it. You don't know what's happening. And that's just simply not true. Actually, by nature, transactions on a blockchain are, they are trackable. You can keep track of them, even though things are encrypted and encoded and you can't necessarily see all of the details. The stuff is actually there. So I think that has been another one of the big impacts. Like you mentioned, those cross-border payments, the remittance as well. And I think we're only going to see more and more in that arena. We're only going to see more in like the evolution of, I call it the evolution of currency, because, we started back in the day, we had a barter system, that went to, we now have, paper and coins, and then we got digital. So we all have credit cards and I can pay things on my phone. I'm not even sure money really exists anymore. It's just numbers, on spreadsheets, or now it's numbers on a blockchain somewhere. So I think there's going to be that evolution to things like CBDCs or like central bank digital currency. So if you look at that evolution of currency in our society, it makes sense that the next iteration of money becomes a cryptocurrency. So I'm not sure if I answer your question or not, Gary. I got a little off track, but I get excited when we have an opportunity to talk about the evolution of money like that.
No, I think you're right on target, and we'll get back to the tax and the auditing part here a little bit. But one reference and one uh, person that I regard very highly in this is George Gilder. And George has been around for years. I followed him throughout my career, and he's written several books. The first was Life After TV, and he's written books before that, but recently, Life After Google, and then most recently, Life After Capitalism. And in that book, he talks about money and the definition of money and how it's changed over time, as you mentioned. But he also talked about wealth is knowledge and growth is learning, and that really money is the courier of the transaction, not the transaction. And then the surprise element is new information coming into this. So I think you're right on track, and it's something that I would encourage our audience to learn more about. And the way I learned was much like you learned back when crypto came out. I said, if I don't get in the game, I'm not going to be able to learn from reading books or listening podcasts. They will only augment my real life experiences. So I'm going to take you back to the taxation and what many accountants, their first experience with the blockchain has been is in the tax area. And you might touch on that a bit.
Yeah, I think a lot of accountants, the first time that they were introduced to cryptocurrencies was a few years ago when the IRS actually updated the 1040 questionnaire asking if the taxpayer had purchased or sold or traded any cryptocurrencies in the last year. And that was it was a real frenzy. Like that's when some firms, some firms had people that were passionate about cryptocurrency and had invested a lot of time and energy into learning those things, but a lot of firms had no idea what was going on there. And then we haven't talked about how cryptocurrency works and things like mining and staking and all of those things, but now firms have clients that are not just buying or selling through like a cryptocurrency exchange, but they are active on these networks. They have nodes on these networks. They are doing the mining, so that process of actually generating new cryptocurrencies, depending on which cryptocurrency you're really working with there. We definitely can't explain all of that in 20 minutes. But my point being, you now have new business types. You have new business structures within this new type of economy that have different business implications, different tax implications. And unfortunately, we don't necessarily have the guidance or the regulation to support these things. Our regulations and guidance just aren't coming as fast as the technology is coming. So that's one of the reasons it's very important for firms and CPAs out there to educate themselves, like you were saying. But they've got to educate themselves so that they can, come together and apply the information and the regulation and the guidance that we have now as best as they possibly can, but also so that they can stay ahead of it as those things actually do start to change, which hopefully will be sooner rather than later.
It's going to be sooner because this is all sped up over it's like the accelerator effect or the flywheel effect. It's just getting faster and faster and more changes. You might speak to some of the tools that address, the topic today beyond spreadsheets, because this is almost an impossibility to track a volatile market on the
Mm-hmm.
blockchain and NFTs and other assets. So you might speak to uh, what some of the software is out there today that keeps track of this for companies and
Yeah.
for individuals.
Yeah, and there's a lot of options out there. It's amazing. I don't necessarily want to go through an entire list of them, but there are a lot of tools that are out there that can help, keep not only keep up with the transactions, but the loss and gains, because again, that's challenging. I mentioned that organizations that are investing in things like mining operations, they now have to consider you know how does your cost of goods sold or services, how does that get impacted by things that are happening on the blockchain? So there are tools out there for keeping up with cryptocurrency transactions. There are tools that can help you track some of these different mining activities. There's just a ton of tools, and I think that the profession really needs to educate themselves on what's out there and ask the question, what does their client actually need? There's things for the individual. So you mentioned individuals, there are ways to get started like crypto exchanges. That's probably the easiest, fastest way to get started in there. But then you still have to keep up with those transactions. So there are some tools at the individual level. There's some at the enterprise level as well. So I don't know, Gary, did you want to go into a list of some of those or?
Well, I like to always give some examples, and I can say that the examples we have no financial interest or promotional
Yep.
uh, fees involved, but things like CoinTracker.io at the personal and small business level, and Verity
Yep.
would be another one. OpenSea,
Yeah.
these are practical.
Bitwave is
Yes.
Bitwave's one that's making a lot of waves. That's a great tool as well. We hear a lot about that. I actually went to their digital asset summit back, I think, in April. and that was a great event, Gary. There was a lot of the accounting concepts that were a bit over my head, so I was really glad I had some accounting colleagues there, and there was some of the technology aspects that were over their heads. So I was happy to be there, and we could really bridge that gap, which I think is a really important point, is that this technology, this currency, these assets, whatever you really want to call them, it's not just one thing. It's technology and an asset. So our profession is going to have to come together and get expertise and insight from many different areas and many different types of people to really be successful and be able to keep up with this.
And that's where the convergence comes in. It's not one technology that's disrupting us, it's many technologies. And I say they're empowering us rather than disrupting us, because you have a choice here. You can wait until it's too late and get totally disrupted and perhaps even put out of business, or you can anticipate what's coming and make the change and ask yourself, what happens if we don't do some of this? And I think that's sometimes more powerful than asking, what if we do? Because the motivation of future success and sustained success are very important. Let's switch gears now with the blockchain, and let's go over to the audit side and the accounting side of the blockchain. And let's talk a little bit about what some of the advantages there are. And I certainly want you to get into the sovereign identity and also the ability to look at multiple transactions rather than using monetary unit sampling.
Yeah. And so, Gary, one of the exciting things about blockchain is that your transactions are there and available. So you have tools that can help look at the entire data set. So to your point, we're not really looking at samples anymore. You can look at the entire data set. You can actually automate, or will be able to automate and proactively look for fraud, opposed to reactively looking for it. So I think that changes the focus of our profession, because we're very used to looking at what happened, not what is actually happening right now. So I think that is a big shift that we're gonna have to go through, and blockchain is going to support that. Now, you mentioned self-sovereign identity, Gary, and that's one of the things that I am very passionate about. I'll try to quickly explain it. If you think about today, you're assigned an identity, by a government with a birth certificate when you're born, and that identity follows you. But if you think of identity as like, I created a Facebook account, I created an email, I created all of these other accounts, these are all pieces of your digital identity. And the thing is, the company that you created that account with is actually the one that owns that identity. You don't own that. And self-sovereign identity would actually give you the power back. So you would be able to share parts of your identity with companies, with vendors that you agree to. But the self-sovereign piece is that you actually have more autonomy and you have more control over what happens and who you share that identity with. I do think that there's still going to have to be mediators in there to verify things, to verify identity, but we'll have a bit more control over it. And one of the things I'm excited about, Gary, is how all of these things tie into Web3. That's kind of where I see the next iteration, and something that's really going to change the way we do everything. So if you look at, the first iteration of the web, there was a lot of text going back and forth. The second iteration of the web, we had more apps. We were mobile first. I was able to create content, put it on social media. We have this whole sharing economy that emerged through like Airbnb and Uber and Uber Eats. Well, the Web3 takes a lot of those things and incorporates things like virtual reality or augmented reality. So looking at a virtual reality environment, you need things like an economy. You need things to pay for goods and services. That's where digital assets come in. And then you need a way to track those things. That's where blockchain comes in. You need a way to control your identity in those areas and in those worlds. That's where self-sovereign identity comes in. So there's a lot of these pieces that have evolved from blockchain, whether it's blockchain, digital assets, self-sovereign identity, smart contracts, that are going to feed into Web3 and a new type of kind of virtual environment and virtual world that we're going to be spending a lot of time in. Not today, maybe not even next year, but one day we will be able to spend a lot more time in a virtual world. And it's the foundation of it is going to be blockchain.
Thanks so much, Amanda. That's why I love working with you. I have the audit background, and the audit assertions haven't changed throughout my career, but the tools and the methodology has certainly changed. And we're just getting started. We could do another session here real quickly, but I thank you for being here today and sharing your knowledge with our audience. And I thank our audience for tuning in. And if you like what you saw here, certainly subscribe to the Boomer Briefing as we continue to bring you topics that we think are relevant to our clients and the profession. And with that, we'll see you next time. Think, plan, and grow.